Outer Banks of North Carolina. Really, that's where like my experience with that area comes from, like vacationing at the beach towns in the Carolinas. I will say Carolinas have the best beach on the East Coast. I mean, there's people that, oh, Florida, no, it's the Carolinas. They have the best beaches on the East Coast. I guess that comes with the hurricane stuff and the OBX, right? They're always saying the ship graveyard or whatever, right there. The way the storms hit that coast just makes it. But yeah, I don't know. I always said that I love. I'm always just interested where everybody's from, and yeah,
Yeah, well, I love that you said that because, I love the beaches on the East Coast because I like to play in the waves and I like the wide, firm sand. But a lot of people prefer the Gulf because of the colors, the bright white and the bright blue. But that's not an ocean you want to play in. You just want to wade through it. So I'm
yeah,
with you. Totally with you.
yeah. That I agree. I agree. I lived in Louisiana for a little while in grad school, and we would, it's like 20 minutes to the Gulf Coast, and it's not the same. It's not even close to the same with those beaches. Yeah, the beaches are always maybe I'm from Baltimore, so maybe it's just the my mid Atlantic. I favor the the mid Atlantic beaches, but yeah, even like West Coast beaches, yeah, they're beautiful, but yeah, it's not the same. I was like that. The Atlantic Ocean is the superior kind of relaxing beach option there.
Well,
That's how we
I'll
ended up.
say something funny and then I'll let you dig in with your
Please, please.
question. I used to live in Baltimore.
Really?
I
When?
did. Well, I'm not sure about the years. I have to give that some thought. I don't know what's going on with his background, but this isn't visual anyway. Uh I lived there from the time I was 4 to 7 years old. And my dad was a golfer and a salesman,
Okay.
and he was a very successful salesman with Johnson and Johnson, but his boss told him, he said, if I ever catch you playing golf on company time, I don't care how great your numbers are, you're fired. And one Friday, my dad got played in a tournament and he won it, and it got in the paper, and his boss saw it and fired him. That's how I became a Southerner because he found a job in Columbia, South Carolina, and we moved.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. But yeah, all right. Everything looks good. We're good.
Yeah, I
I,
listened to some of your podcasts, so I
oh,
kind of get the
good,
vibe
good.
for it. Yeah, I'm a little bit more intense probably than your vibe, but that's cool. That's cool.
I
We'll
like that. Yeah, it's like we're going to explore that. Yeah.
Heavy,
Bored.
heavy,
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
resources,
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Wittstadt, and you are listening to Heavy Board. And we're recording this on May 6th, 2025. My guest today is Tara Heaton. Tara is the founder of Endpoint Communication. She's been a leading sales director for decades. She's a public speaker and regularly presents at businesses and conferences around the world. But Tara is also a writer. Her memoir, Life Minutes, came out just this past March. The subtitle reads, Igniting Joy from the Fire of Heartache. And that's what this book does, listeners. It captures Tara's journey, but more than that, it captures that of her daughters as well. After Tara's daughter was diagnosed with a debilitating brain disease, the book chronicles the harrowing journey and what it takes to get to the other side of heartache and tragedy. Tara has given TED Talks, she's traveled all over the globe, and operates a blog on her website, which is linked below, listeners, where she writes regular pieces about coping strategies and training the mind in various ways to increase joy and hope within. And she is here today to tell us the story of how this book came to be. Tara Heaton, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, we're excited. We like to ask the same question of all writers when we start this off here. Kind of, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did these kind of early years start to form Tara?
Great question. I really have not given this a whole lot of thought until the past few years, quite honestly. And I grew up just kind of in a traditional setting, middle class family. But I had a mother who was so devoted to her children with such an extreme tendency to be an empath that we consumed her. And our happiness was her happiness, and our heartache was hers. It was her greatest gift and probably her most tragic flaw. And interesting, my father was the opposite of her. He was a very driven salesperson. He was a golfer. He was rarely at home. And when he was at home, I think he looked at his role as a father was to make his kids tough and make us fighters. And so that combination has left me with certainly some, I guess, what we call today little T trauma.
Yeah.
But it has left me, I think, being a woman who is a fighter. And thanks to my mom, I know what's important to me. I know what I want to fight for.
What did your mother do? Was she a stay-at-home mom? Did she work? What kind of?
My mother was a stay-at-home mom until my parents divorced. And I think she probably was in her late 30s, but had never really worked. She had a terrible, terrible stutter. And I watched a woman with extreme insecurities become the number 3 salesperson in a big company. And the stuttering went away and it never returned. And she just did that all because she knew she had to get up, get out there and fight for her children.
Really, really. And she overcame the stutter through just perseverance. There wasn't any like speech pathology or.
No. And all her life she had stuttered. And the more successful she became, she was the type of salesperson. It was all about sincerity and caring and taking care of other people. Her confidence grew and the stutter just somehow just dissipated.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And you said your father, in our conversation leading up to this, you said your father was in sales.
He was a very successful salesperson until he retired, and he just passed away last year. Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess we're going to get into stuff like that too. I mean, it's like, I'm always curious. Like, I want to ask you about grief and stuff like that and people's thoughts, especially given your book and just overcoming things. Yeah, I'm approaching middle age now. I'm in my mid 30s, and I'm starting to kind of get that. Yeah, that my parents are aging and stuff like that. Like every time I see them, and I just more and more of just something that preoccupies my mind. Kind of, oh, I got to make the most of this because who knows what could happen, all of that. But yeah, very interesting. And you grew up in South Carolina?
I did until I was 17. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. And when I graduated from high school, I packed my bags and I wanted to go to New York to become a ballerina. But my mother said, let's try Atlanta. So I was 17 and moved to the corner of Peachtree and 7th in a little, what they called back then, an efficiency apartment. And I danced ballet every day and went to Georgia State in the mornings, but I abandoned the dream of being a ballerina and I stayed in Atlanta. Really, and most of my life has been in Atlanta with the exception of raising my children in Athens, Georgia, and now I'm back in South Carolina.
Yeah, yeah. You were a ballerina, so you were an aspiring dancer. When did you start dancing? When did that happen? Was that just a young age?
Probably when I was 3 and just loved it, loved it, loved it. When I got to Atlanta and how I saw how competitive it was and how lonely it was the lonely piece of it. I mean, I'm a people person. I'm not a super social like extrovert, but that deep, authentic connection, that's, a big part of who I am. And to really have made it back then being a dancer, you pretty much had to sacrifice school, food.
Right. Yeah.
Friendships. It wasn't the life for me. So I walked away from it.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about that. My wife was she never got that serious about it, but she did, dance through high school and stuff like that. And yeah, for that type of career, I knew some athletics. I played football and things like that, and friends that went on to play in college and at the higher levels, it was so intense. But dancing is one, I think people don't even understand how intense, not just physically, but yeah, the competition, the mental competition with everybody else. And plus, your career's over at 26, like,
Right.
like even if all that work and then you turn 26 and your career is over, you're going to do something else anyways. So it is,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. That's fun. That's
Yeah, you have to love it more than you love anything
right.
else. And
Right.
I just simply didn't love it enough.
Yeah, yeah. Especially going to once you go to I like that story that you go to the big city, you wanted to go to New York. It's everybody wants I wanted that when I was a teenager, growing up where I did be like, oh, I'm just gonna get on the train and I'm just gonna go up there and see what happens. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it's something of like the possibilities of big city life or whatever. But when you're young and you're kind of romanticize that, you don't know the reality of it. It's like actually everybody is they're willing to sabotage your entire career, right? They'll take a bait, accidentally hit your knee with something, yeah, it is that intense. But the next question is always, when did reading and writing come into your life? Was that something you always did, something that came later in life? Yeah, when did reading and writing come into your life?
Well, funny story. I wrote a book when I was in about the second grade called Purple Peas, and it was tied together with yarn, and I was very proud of it. And I thought when I was in second grade that I wanted to be a writer. And I majored in journalism, and I thought that I was going to be a journalist. And I spent some years in journalism, and I was working for a small Atlanta newspaper. It was called Atlanta Women's News, and I helped writing and editing, but I also had to sell ads. And I learned through that experience that when I was going to sell ads, it was the same kind of connection as writing feature articles, that you had to really get someone to open up to you and understand them and make a connection to make a sale. And I moved into sales because I got married, had a baby, and sales was making a lot more money than
Right.
journalism. And I really never returned to it. So until much, much later in my life.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask. Yeah, like how you got into sales. But then you said your father was a salesman and stuff. It was almost like the family business, right? And then your mother got into it. It is one of those, sales is another one, like athleticism, it's there. You can get into it. It's not, the bar for entry is not super high, but to be successful, I mean, but to actually be successful in sales, it is a grind. I mean, you have to hustle. You have to be constantly doing outreach, contacting clients. And a lot of people don't want to do that work, so if you're somebody that can do that work, you can be very successful at it. So yeah, I was curious, about how sales came to be in your life like that. It's interesting that writing led to it. Writing ad copy led to sales. Yeah, that's interesting too. Because I mean, I was an English major, obviously aspiring writer. And when I got out of college, like I learned very quickly that all you could do with an English degree, at least post 2008 kind of world, is ad copy. That's literally the only jobs you can get that are actually going to pay you to write. Nobody else is going to pay you to write. You have to kind of do that on your own. Yeah. I mean, you could hustle, like you could hustle and start pitching to all these, but I mean, that's the same thing. It's super competitive. There's a whole lot of people that want to do it, or they want to say they want to do it. They want to dabble in it, dip their toe into it. But then, getting to that other side is quite a hustle. A lot of times you have to really sell yourself. All of that. So I just, I think it matters. The reason I ask all these questions, especially, is just because I think to be creative, there's creativity that needs to happen in so many different professions. Even the sciences, people are like, oh, the hard sciences, you're a doctor, you're just following the facts. There's still some imagination, some creativity in how you're going to do this, how you're going to come up with a solution, how you're going to treat this thing. Like there's still that inner, I don't know. I mean, I just like to expand it broad like that.
Please. Spot on, because in the world of sales, at least in my experience, and now as I coach people, a lot of people have to give those presentations and they need to stand out in a competitive world. That is all about being creative. And that's the part of it that I just, you say it's a grind. Anything we do, if we're going to be successful at it, I feel like we're going to grind.
Yeah.
But it should be something that you're passionate about. And I'm very passionate about sales with authenticity and honesty, not the whole bait and switch side of sales. And you can be successful that way, but that was never me. It was more about taking care of people.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because most people, they feel their experience with sales, like you obviously did it at a much higher level where you're selling kind of, what do they call it? B2B almost. You're selling to other businesses, right? But people's experiences, like, oh, buying a car or going into like a fancy department store or something. And then the salespeople are like, they almost feel pushy because they're there's commission or whatever they're trying to push for. But the most successful salespeople are always the ones that don't make you feel that way, that don't push stuff on you, that aren't trying to upsell you. Oh, get the undercoating on the car or whatever, people like have a bad taste in their mouth when that happens. Actually,
Absolutely.
I just saw something recently. It came across my, of course, it's always the algorithm that shoves it in your face. That Rory Sutherland guy who's like that British marketing guru, or, markets himself as that. He was saying something about the most successful car salesman in the UK or something. The reason he was so successful is because he did that. Like, he would tell people, you don't need this speaker system or whatever. I'll save you 10 grand right here, honestly. And like, people, because of that, people came back to him. So when they bought their car from him initially, they came back a couple years later to buy another car from him because they trusted him. You have to establish this trust, and there's a creative way to do that, tap. And I want to get to your whole program on that, but yeah, very, very interesting stuff. The next question we like to ask are, what were some of the first writers you were enamored with, or who are your go-to inspirations or idols in the literary world, or who inspired you to write a book like this? We can broaden it even further.
Favorite authors is a hard one because I'm so all over the place right now. I'm really drawn to memoir, but people that I've consistently read are not really in my genre. Like, I've consistently read Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, because I'm so fascinated with the whole world of communication as it relates to research and science. So those are some of my top folks. Tara Schwartz, she's a neuroscientist. But I'll tell you why I wrote the book, and why I'm going to write another one, and why I'm in love with the process and the communication of it. For years, when I would share with people what was going on in my life, they would always say, "You should write a book. That should be a movie." And that's not why I wrote the book. I would listen to that and I would think, well, do I just want to share my family's journey to sensationalize and entertain? But the longer I lived as my daughter's warrior and the best friend of my gay ex-husband and all the colorful things that make our life story entertaining, the longer I lived it, the more I learned. And I've heard it said before, if you've gained wisdom, the most selfish thing you can do is keep it to yourself. So I thought, if I could find a way to write a book that would take people away from their lives with beautiful storytelling, and then at the end of those stories, have kind of a revelatory moment and feel empowered and more free and more truthful and more capable of loving, then the suffering of my family will matter. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's it's, everybody likes to imagine the material stuff you get out of having the book. Yeah, the movie deals, the book deal, whatever, the checks you would get, people like that. Like, oh, that's what mattered. But like, you're talking about the intangible thing you get from it, which I think is the thing that makes us love books. Like, it makes us go back to say, it's that intangible thing that it gives you, that strength, that warm feeling, the love. I mean, whatever it is you're getting out of that thing that you keep going back to. It's very interesting. But yeah, I'm always curious what inspired it. And yeah, like, so the science writing, very interesting too, because I have some questions about that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the how do you communicate that? And that's always something that people struggle with. They really struggle with, how do you communicate this kind of, because I mean, some of this stuff is so complex. You do need to have like a PhD or level understanding to really get into the weeds with it. So how do you summarize that into easily digestible bites for people that can, aren't going to get into the nitty gritty about all this stuff? They don't have to, but they need to be informed about the gist. That's a skill. I mean, that's quite a skill. And I like that you equate it to sales. I like that you equate it to the skills that you've developed, the perseverance in athleticism and dance. I mean, that all matters when it comes time to tell a story about, even like, yeah, memoir, like your own life, or a fictional story. I think it matters so much. And it's just great to hear that, for sure.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to ask you about your company, Endpoint Communication. Why did you start that company? Why, after this very successful career in sales, start your own communications company? Why did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, I have a very simple, clear answer for you. I ran my own business. It was kind of like a franchise for a lot of years, and it was quite successful. So much so that the parent company asked me to become their national sales trainer and train across the country what I was doing in Athens, Georgia. So I sold my business and I went to work as a national sales trainer. And I loved that work, helping people to tell better stories that bring them greater results, help them to present better. Back in those days, there was a lot of cold calling techniques, all those things I loved. And apparently so did the company. And then they promoted me to vice president of sales. And damn, did I hate that. All of a sudden, this very creative, passionate trainer, for lack of a better word, was someone actually threw a book at me that said Excel for Dummies. And I saw what all the pieces that really make a corporation tick. And Andrew, it's just not for me. I understand why I have to do all this reporting and budgeting and managing and firing and hiring and tough conversations. I hated it. What I love to do is help people to communicate more effectively so that they can get what they want out of life. That's why I started On Point Communication.
Yeah. It's always, I love that story because it's such an American kind of, you reached a pinnacle in this career. It's very successful. From the outside, it'd be like, oh, this is so great. What are you complaining about? But then you have this thing inside of you that's calling out and you're like, actually, I really don't like this. Like, I really don't like this. I want to do something. I mean, I think that's all entrepreneurs or they'll find something that they really like. And then they'll how do I bring this to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And then the money kind of comes, or the success kind of comes after that. But yeah, I was just curious how that led to it. I guess were you just always doing this kind of, I guess so in that field, you're doing a lot of presentations, a lot of communicating, a lot of reporting to, shareholders, the board, your bosses, customers, everything. And it kind of just a natural next step to go to start a business like this.
I don't think for most people, a lot of people love that corporate setting. It just isn't for me. Like, I've always had a little bit of a rebellious nature about me. And if somebody tells me how to do something, when to do it, and where to do it, I'm going to push back. I've always been a bit of a rule breaker, only the bad rules. I don't break good rules. I remember the general manager, I reported to general manager, and I cannot tell you how many times he said these words to me. Whoa, horsey. And if you know anything about me, if you read my book, you will know that don't tell Tara, whoa, horsey. More a little bit like lock arms with me or get out of my way because we're moving.
Yeah. That's interesting too. Kind of the drive, and it isn't everybody. Yeah, it isn't everybody, but there is this. I like that you said rebelliousness. It's one. I think it's required to even write a book. You have to have something to say, and usually it's a rebellious thing. Usually, at least against some consensus or status quo, or maybe new information, or maybe a new technique, or maybe a story, and a very original story we haven't seen before, or something if we do the creative fiction stuff. And I think that it's required. It's required to even have something to say. You have to kind of be, I don't think so. Like when somebody tells you something like, oh, this is how that we do it. So, well, that's not what we're doing.
Yes, I love that you say that, because one of the things that I teach folks to do is when you have a presentation to give or you're ready to tell a story, ask yourself this: what belief are you challenging? What myth are you busting? That's the mindset. What problem are you solving? That was more common, but ask yourself what people to believe to be true and how you see it differently. And there is a powerful story in that. And yeah,
absolutely. And this brings me to talk to the brain.
Yes.
What started this, and what is it for listeners? Give us an overview, and then how that came to be.
Yeah, thank you. I love talking about it. So thank you. Well, when I believe that you mentioned this, but when I was growing my business as a sales leader, as a sales representative, and then building a business, my 12-year-old daughter, I was truly living the American dream, like a rewarding career, loving husband, everything's great. My 12-year-old daughter contracted what the pediatrician said was just a little virus, but it traveled to her brain and caused her to have encephalitis, which she survived, and a lot of people don't. And after the encephalitis, when all the inflammation was gone, she had to relearn to walk, to write, to hold a hairbrush, everything. And she relearned it all. And we thought we had our daughter back, but it left her with epilepsy. And they started putting her on drugs for seizures, which are horrible drugs, very, very sedative. And her life just seemed as if it was slipping through her fingers. She was in the 7th grade. And about a year into this journey, I sat down with her neurologist and I said, Dr. Weissman, can we please take Caroline off these drugs? They've taken the life out of my little girl and they're not even working. And Dr. Weissman said no, because Caroline's seizures travel across her hippocampus. And that is what controls her learning, her memory, and it helps her to manage her emotions. That day marked what has now been a 20-year study of the brain. And the more I learned, first as Caroline's warrior, the more I learned, it started really underpinning my work as a sales coach and a sales consultant and as a sales leader. Like, that's why people respond to these vulnerable stories. And that's why people trust or don't trust. So when I left the corporate gig, I really wanted to help people in the presentation setting. And I knew I had something with neuroscience. And I joined a Toastmasters group and I gave a Toastmasters talk and I called it Talk to the Brain. And I talked about the primary neurotransmitters of pleasure in this talk and how we can bring this out of folks that we talk to. And when I sat down, this guy beside me said, that's some TED Talk shit right there. And for weeks after that, people started saying the Talk to the Brain lady. And it just took off from there. So now people call me the Talk to the Brain lady.
Yeah. Well, I think what strikes me so interesting, what's so interesting about this is no background in this, no training in neuroscience or brain chemistry, whatever, but, a need occurred, this thing occurred, and then you just started researching it as a total amateur, and then coming to conclusions. And I'm thinking of all the stuff that even in advertising, there is so much about the psychology, the brain chemistry of advertising when you're in sales and you're writing ad copy. Whenever I look at in my field, again, the only jobs you can get are doing my field right now is writing ads or training AI. And it's they're always oh, have you gone through these courses on the psychology of advertising and stuff? And I'm thinking of stuff, the phrases that people throw out, like neuro-linguistic programming, this kind of stuff that it creates like maps in the brain as they describe it, right? And then you kind of, how do you change that? And I think even, people give Tony Robbins or something like, oh, this guy's not a psychiatrist, he's not. But why people flock to that is because he gives them, it'd be like, no, do this instead of this, he just gives them something try this action.
Yeah.
And people flock to that because it's much more immediate and you can get a benefit from it than, talking for a year and a half on a couch or something where they're like, oh, well, how are you feeling? Where he's just kind of like, no, change the brain makeup right now, change your habit right now. And it's hard, but we can do it. I don't know. I mean, I think that it's undersold in our culture right now. Yeah. People are like, oh, they're a huckster. They're, snake oil salesman. He's not a psychiatrist, but it's also, but it works. It works. There's a reason celebrities pay him millions of dollars to have one-on-one meetings. It works. So, I mean, what can you do? There's all the evidence you need. I mean, what else is there?
Well, I want to touch on something that you said.
Please.
Because, I used to think, well, maybe I want to get a degree in this. Maybe I want to get a neuropsych degree. But I don't. And I'll tell you why. It's not neurolinguistics either, because it's not really about helping people to change their brain. While I've studied it and I understand it, why it has become powerful for me and why it works just based on my research is I teach the strategy of storytelling and of clear, effective communication first, and then I can back it up with neuroscience if anyone's interested. I used to do it differently, Andrew. I would tell a lot about the science of serotonin and how to generate that in the minds of others. That bored a lot of people. But for the people that want the proof and they think it's cool and interesting, oh, can I tell you why a clear, compelling, strongly formatted story is going to get you better results? I can tell you the neuroscience behind that. So it really gives proof to what really in the world of storytelling, which is what I specialize in, it gives a lot of proof to what I always suspected to be true.
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what I think is I was trying to get at. Yeah, the suspicion that leads to be true. Like kind of, I even like, this is kind of unrelated, but I like Cesar Millan and his dog training. He calls it dog psychology. And he always says in his books and stuff, and I had a problem dog for a few years. So I was, looking for things to help and train, and that worked. But he always says, I'm not a scientist. I don't do studies. He's like, I have these intuitions about it, kind of. He's like, and then a study will come out a few years later that kind of proves that my intuition was right. Like it kind of, you don't necessarily, I mean, you need the study to be able to prove it, but like in your own brain, you don't need a study. Like you just need to reach a certain point. This is my hunch. This is what I'm feeling. And then all of a sudden it comes true. But yeah, that's interesting too. I have questions about storytelling too. And I think it's only recently too. I mean, I don't keep up with psychology like as much as I do, English and literature and stuff, but it's just recently are they started even in like marriage counseling and stuff like that. They're storytelling. It's like, what stories are you telling yourself, where they ask you that kind of question. It's very recent that they started doing this. At least, most therapists or whatever. And like,
Yes.
what are you telling yourself about them? What are the stories? Oh, if you're telling yourself this story, it's always going to be that. But if you change the story, it can change other things. So I mean, I have questions about storytelling and your techniques for that too. But this got into this talk to the brain and all that messaging. It's what your entire company is focused on. I wanted to ask you, why is messaging so important? And what's the difference between messaging and advertising, or is there a difference?
Wow, that was a lot of questions.
I know I have long questions. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I want to back up just a moment and clarify why storytelling, because I do help speakers and I help leaders to lead teams and I help teams to connect more deeply. And a lot of this is through the work of storytelling. And the reason why it is so powerful is because what stories are our life experiences. And when people understand that every life experience, when we commit it to memory, and this is where some of my training has come in, when we commit it to memory, it is because we learned something from that experience. And so to be generous to other humans, we should identify what it is that we learned, rather helpful, negative, positive, what I want to be, not what I want to be, and share it forward. And that's where some of the, not only the art, but really the science and the sport of it is. There's an effective way to tell a story that makes it memorable and makes it repeatable, which helps people get better results for their company or for their sales or with their teams. And there is many, many crummy ways to share a story. People seem to think that they need to learn to tell, and I'm doing air quotes here, their story. And I always say, you do not have a story, nor do I, nor do any of us. What we have is a journey, and it is decorated with hundreds of stories. And the more relatable those stories are, the more powerful they are to the audience. So it's not the horrific journey of my daughter's brain slowly being impaired by seizures. It's the emotions that I faced during that journey that are relatable to so many people. Anyone who has the capacity to love can relate to not my journey, but all those moments of all those feelings. There's so many stories there that can make a difference. So I'm not sure I even answered your question.
No, it's fine, because I think that's, it's a theme on this podcast that I've been obsessed with stories. And I think even the myths, the mythology that makes up, we can make it real easy. We talk about like Greek mythology or something, but I think even American mythology and stuff, like things that I feel like American culture and stuff like that have been under attack's a strong phrase, but like people, I just feel like there's trying to rewrite the stories that we told ourselves about our country. I always use the founding fathers as an example, just because everybody knows them and stuff like that. Like the stories we told, they're not even really true, like kind of like mythical stories, but it helps us to create this bond between people that we don't even know. Like, oh, well, we're all American. Well, what supports that idea that makes people, satisfied with that answer? Well, it's this myth making that we did, these stories that we tell each other about the land, like the institutions, the kind of, and I'm just so obsessed with that because it's so powerful. It really is. And out here in Vegas, there's this bus station kind of advertisement I see all the time I think it's for an ad company, but I'm not entirely sure. But they always say, tell better stories is like their slogan, And I'm always thinking like, yeah, of course they don't tell one in the ad, but I'm just like, but that is the key to it, right? Where like if you give people a story that like hits a certain spot, and like you said, it doesn't even have to be the specific details that line up with your life exactly or something like that, but it gives you that feeling. It kind of bonds you to whatever it is, even if they're trying to sell a product or whatever. You are kind of, so it really is this kind of how we tell stories. And people talk about history and like, talk about Howard Zinn or whatever. I have his book on the shelf. Like it's this kind of, you can change, if you change the story, you change so much other stuff too without even thinking about like the second and third order effects of changing the story. Like you don't even realize, because we didn't realize how powerful this kind of myth is, like even if it's a false story or or exaggerated or just a couple of little grains of truth, whatever. But yeah, so I'm fascinated by that, and I love hearing your take on it, because
well, that's where a lot of the neuroscience comes in that people are just not aware of. But when you said it binds people, and it does, and something is generated in our system called oxytocin. When we connect and lock arms with people and feel like we've gone through something difficult together, trust builds, and something called oxytocin fires up in our brain. And that is one of the most powerful neurotransmitters that we can generate to help us stay grounded and connected to humans on this earth. Yeah.
It's the big chemical between mothers and children, is that
Yeah.
chemical oxytocin release. Yeah. It's that bonds you to your baby and all of that.
Yeah, well, men have it too, but men
Right.
actually, they will generate something called vasopressin more than oxytocin. And vasopressin is kind of like the brother of oxytocin, but it also gives you this feeling of like wanting to be a protector and fierce. And that's why it's more common in men with more testosterone. People with more testosterone, I'll say.
I remember when my daughter was born, I definitely felt that. That's for sure. I would talk to people like, I'm feeling this, like I've never felt it before, like this kind of, yeah. But yeah, messaging, like kind of like, why is messaging so important? We just talked about why messaging is so important, but what's the difference between messaging and advertising? Because I think people could be cynical about a storytelling, but they're just trying to sell you something or whatever. Or Absolutely. Is there a difference? What would you say in your expertise and experience?
Messaging and ad copy. I've never really thought about it in these terms, but here is what I can tell you about why messaging is so important. And I think that messaging, from what I understand, the people that I work with, messaging is just a small part of your advertisement and your advertising. Your messaging, and here's again where the brain science comes in, needs to be super clear and digestible and repeatable. And I'll give you a very powerful example of why that repeatable piece is really important. I have coached salespeople for decades who go in, they do a presentation to whomever is on the panel. They come out of there saying, we got it, we got the sale, we're so excited, they were so fired up. Well, the people on the panel may have to go to the VP or the CEO and say, this is what we want to do. And if they do not have the words to repeat and clarify and quantify why they want to make the change to the company or work with this person or make this investment, the whole deal falls apart. So we can give that same lesson even to entrepreneurs. If you give a presentation or you're in a negotiation or a collaboration and you try to say something 3 different ways, but you're saying the same thing, it's good that you've been repetitive, but it's still hard for the person to remember. But if you have some key phrases that can be repeated and you say them over and over again, that's when the brain, because of your stories and because of your data, will be able to repeat those phrases and tell it forward. Even as small as talking to a gentleman, he wants to buy something, but he's like, I'm going to go home and talk to my wife. Goes home, talks to his wife. Well, why do you want to do it? Well, I just really liked them. I think they were great. If he cannot articulate why, the whole thing falls apart. So that's why clear, succinct, repeatable messaging is so, so important.
Is there a difference between, like, would that be like slogans or something, like one example of many maybe for?
It could be, absolutely. Usually when I think about messaging, I mean, slogan is more just like to help you with your brand. And I think that they're very important, but a slogan and marketing is not going to make a sale. What does is connection and people. So I offer big structures So whether it's a presentation or a story, I have a very clear framework. And then we have the nuances that really make it work. And one of those is something that I call story with stats. People will share a story. They understand the power of it, so they want to share an emotional story. But if it doesn't have a benefit to the listener, then it's just an interesting story.
Right.
And if we don't back it up with some data, then people can't prove it to themselves. Once those emotions, so we got that dopamine going and that serotonin, and the person's like, yeah, I really like this. I like this person. But if they don't have clear data and some repeatable phrases that quantify those emotions, they will fleet. The emotions are fleeting. Those neurotransmitters will dissipate and no action is taken.
Yeah. That's interesting too. And I mean, I think of something like this is something politicians try to do often too, where like if they want, they're, obviously speaking on behalf of whatever they're trying to get passed, they'll pull up some example. Yeah. A story with stats example, kind of like, oh, look at this person. Here's the stats. This is why we want to, I mean, it's kind of like a messaging advertising thing where they're trying to get you to buy into why it's happening, what they're doing. And of course, politics, everybody has their own take on that, but it's also just this tool for it too. So I'm interested in that. And I think of I like advertising. I'm not just because I've worked in it and stuff like that. I do believe in the kind of art of advertising, the kind of, I love the Coca-Cola Christmas packaging or something like that's an advertisement. Like the commercial, like, does it make you want this product? Does it make you say, I need to buy it? Like, I want that. Or does it make you think about what it tastes like because you've had it before, Coca-Cola or something like familiar, a big iconic product? I don't know. I think that there's a real art to that even. And like you said, kind of the difference between what the message is that's actually getting into the person's head. It's not necessarily the specific ad copy or like what's being said in the ad. It's the amalgamation of everything in the ad. That's the message that you're getting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess that's why sometimes you see too vague ads too. When you see, we've had former marketing executives and stuff on the podcast, and he was talking about recently what he's seen in marketing is that they're not telling stories. Like, he's retired now and stuff like that. But he said, he's seen a lot of these ads. It's almost lazy ads, he says, where they're not doing the extra step to get that message, what you would call the messaging angle into the ad. It's just this, if they even tell a story, it's just the story and doesn't connect with you. And like you said, the kind of the chemicals in your brain that are firing when you're watching the ad quickly dissipate because you're not getting that connection that you want to take the action to sell the product or buy the product. And
I'll give you a perfect example. My husband and I like to play Wordle, and then we've started playing Hurdle. Do you know what Hurdle is?
No. And I've never played Wordle, but I know the concept. I'm sure listeners are familiar with the concept of Wordle. Yeah, but
Hurdle is like Wordle on crack. And Hurdle is not New York Times. So Wordle is New York Times. Hurdle is with the Washington Post. It's longer. It takes you a little bit longer to do it. And there's an ad that always pops up during it. And my husband and I will play it every either morning or night if we're together. And like, we've been playing this for weeks, and the same commercial keeps coming up. And Mike says, this commercial never really made me want a Chick-fil-A. And I was like, is that what this ad is about? And he's like, yeah. I mean, I never even noticed. So point taken that it was about Chick-fil-A.
Right.
Then, they have the Christmas commercials for Publix where these families are getting together, and they just keep showing that it's all, all came from Publix. There's no doubt that to me was much, much, much more effective because it taps into emotions that are relatable, things that we can relate to that make us feel nostalgic, and we want that. And then Publix just continued to say that Publix can bring this experience to life for you. So it's very nuanced as to whether or not it's going to work for you.
Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, I didn't plan on asking you about this, but I wonder how much social media affects this, because I do think that we're in that world now. We're in the world of social media is the filter on top of everything that happens, everything that's said, everything that's published and put out into the world, including advertisements and things like that. They focus group test it, usually online now. But it's just, I don't know. I think that there is that. Yeah. Like, people forget to give you the whole picture in these ads now. And I'm thinking of Super Bowl ads or something. these companies are shelling out so much money to these advertising companies, and they're giving them a half completed ad because they're giving you one aspect of it, like pretty pictures or something. They're not connecting you to the product that makes you want to buy it. And maybe it's a legacy product like Budweiser or Coca-Cola or whatever that's probably going to have sales no matter what. They really probably don't even have to advertise if they didn't want to.
Yeah.
They're so big now at this point. But I don't know. I mean, that's just so fascinating to me with, yeah, how you see that, because you know when an ad works on you, you know when it works on you, and you know when it doesn't. So I'm very fascinated by that.
Well, part of it's generational, like Generation X and now the new Alpha generation, they're the least trusting.
Yeah.
They've learned that because today with social media, which is their norm, you are able to choose your truth. Like once you start to say that you're with, you like more socially liberal concepts, those ads come up. And during elections, I'm sure you saw it. Whoever you were in the camp for, it was all their ads, all their media, all their news. And our younger generations know this. That's why there's very few moments in advertising where you really have audiences from all different mindsets, and Super Bowl is one of them.
Yeah, that's interesting too. And I've seen interest. I mean, I don't know enough about it. And again, this isn't a podcast where we need definitive answers. I'm always just curious everybody's thoughts, but it's just, the Freakonomics guys that do that kind of stuff. They had a very interesting podcast episode about online advertising. And it's marketed to companies as this, we can get you the most specific targeted marketing that you can. And they can with this algorithmic kind of designed, shoving it in front of the right people that would buy it. But they did an interesting study where it said almost like 60 to 70% of online ads are seen by almost no one, because it's so targeted that it almost doesn't reach its main audience, or a broader audience. And I'm like, that's interesting. And, this gets into the memes and all the internet is fake memes and stuff. Like, is any of this real? Are they just spending money on ads and they're not going to anybody?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's why the ability to communicate effectively and clearly and to be memorable is more important today than ever before, not only because of all the competition out there, but I'm sure what all this stimulation is doing to our brains. So when we are communicating, even with the captive audience, it's the world of ADHD. I mean, we need fast, quick information that's entertaining, or we're going to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is leading to, I wanted to ask you about public speaking. How did you get started in that field, and why is that such a good medium for those trying to get ideas out, compared to all the other platforms online and so forth? Yeah, public speaking. How did you get started, and why is that such an effective medium for something like this?
Well, I got started, I will say early on in my sales career, when I was building the business in Athens, Georgia. I was put into a territory that was completely male dominated. I had no business. And I was competing against all these dudes.
Yeah.
And I had to figure out a way to compete. And I learned to teach leadership workshops, and that helped me to stand apart. So early on, I just took the courage and just put the microphone in my hand and started giving these leadership workshops and learning how to do it. And I really perfected it. And then I started hiring salespeople because my business was growing, and I taught them to present. So I had a passion for it. And then I didn't tell you this part of the corporate story. It sounds a little bit, I don't know, braggadocious, but this is the truth of it. When I was hired on to be the national sales trainer, the company was in a moment where they were bringing on they bought a whole nother company, and their CEO was coming in to be in charge. And he walked into our national sales convention, and I was at the microphone telling a story. And he looked at the general manager, he looked on the stage, he looked back at the general manager, and he said, "That's your VP of sales. That's who I want."
Yeah.
And it was all because of my speaking. He did not know anything about me. It was just me with the microphone in my hand telling my story. So that gave me a boost of like, wow, I really can affect people. And so through my years in corporate, those were my favorite moments, not because I had a microphone in my hand and I could talk about myself, but because I always remembered that I was taking people's most valuable resource, and that's their time, and that I was there to give and to serve and to never let it be about me. And I just have fallen in love with it.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I was curious. it's always this thing was, oh, public speaking. And it's like, oh, people get all nervous. I've always been, not that I'm great at it, but I was always just kind of natural for me. Like I was fine standing up in class, or, I was a teacher for many years. I taught college for about a decade, and I was, you're giving a presentation, public speaking every day in that setting. And like, it was just always something I never had an issue with. Readings and stuff for my creative work. Like when I would do it, like I put on a performance almost, and like people would be like embarrassed to go after me. And I was like, yeah, you should be, because people they don't want to sit here and look at you, like read something nervously off a piece of paper. Like they want to be presented to, like, I don't know. So I'm just curious, because it is a skill that you can learn. And I like that you said that, like you went to workshops and improved on this thing that you were kind of naturally already inclined to do. And you can learn these certain skills. And people talk, they talk about politicians. And again, I hate to keep bringing up politicians, but yeah, the ones that are really good at public speaking, right away, because they are so good at answering a question. They are so good at keeping your attention. They're so good at not getting angry or hyped up or something. They're just very like, and obviously they've had training, they've had media training, they've had public speaking training and stuff. And it is something you can do, but not everybody wants to do it. Yeah. So I like how that got in there, how you got started with it and all that. Cause I mean, that's the business, right? As you're going around and you're presenting these ideas to people. I'm fascinated by that, and how you kind of you sell yourself. And I think about this for writers. I think about this for entrepreneurs, and even, in the internet age, content creators, air quotes, right? Which I guess I technically am one of those now, but it's, I mean, there's a constant need to sell yourself in today's market in some way. So, I mean, if you can't present yourself or your ideas or your company or whatever you're trying to do in a way that reaches people, I mean, you're way behind everybody else almost. You're never going to get out of the rat, the pack of rats trying to do that. Yeah. So,
well, I'll tell you something. You mentioned that you have never had a problem speaking, and that it feels comfortable to you. That type of mindset makes you my most challenging client. Because the folks that aren't nervous and that pretty much think, like I get this comment a lot, and I quote, "I don't mind speaking." I want to coach people that can't wait to make a difference to the people that are listening. And that makes you a little bit nervous. The people that are super comfortable are oftentimes the least coachable. Because they kind of see it as, I've got this.
Right.
But if you really look into the very best speakers, for if anybody is listening to this and they want to get into speaking, the very most effective speakers have a coach, and they practice. Whereas I think that we think, oh, I'm a pro. People even say to me, oh, you don't need to practice. You got this. My husband, he's like, oh, you got a speech coming up. He's like, you know how to do this crap. That's what he calls it. He's a German engineer. Yeah. And I'm like, yes. And I'm going to give it all I have by practicing and nailing those phrases and making sure that the messaging is clear and effective. And so, yeah, it's a lifelong practice for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's something I discovered in grad school. Yeah, where I would in college, I could just wing it, sure, and I'd be like, oh, it's not a big deal. But then, like when it mattered more to me, even for something like this, where it's like preparation. Yeah, I always tell people, even like, oh, you're nervous about reading your own creative work or something, or you're writing an article and reading it. I'm like, practice in the mirror. I mean, this is you try it. I mean, you're not going to get better by not practicing. But yeah, for me too, one of my everything has to be written down. If I don't write it down before the process, I'm going to forget it. I'm going to forget to mention it or say it, even if it's just a little note or something, and then I can expand. And then of course, you always leave it open to have place where you can go free range off script and stuff. But yeah, that's interesting too. Yeah. I tend to be, I think you're not the first person. I think I've had many mentors who be like, you're kind of hard to get through to with some of the stuff. Yeah.
I'm not saying that's true about you, Drew, but it sounds like you put a lot of effort into your speaking. Like I try to, that I can wing it because I'm a pro.
Right.
I'm just going to wing it. I'm a pro. I don't want to be scripted. I just feel like that's not honoring the audience.
That, and I always compare it to professional sports. It's like, we like it when it looks like you didn't try. When it's like, oh, it's very sexy when it looks like you didn't put any effort into it. But like, that's not possible. You're not going to have anything be very good without putting effort into it. These athletes look like they didn't put any effort into it, but every single day they're putting effort into it. So it is. that. But it brings us to, I wanted to ask you about this phrase that I saw on your website and stuff like that, actionable energy. It's the phrase on your website describing your public speaking style, but I was intrigued by it. And I wanted to ask, what do you mean by that actionable energy? Because I think it's a great phrase.
I like that phrase for a couple reasons. Is a lot of people promise to energize the audience and they're going to be all inspired and motivated and fired up. And those are all great things. But if there is not clear action, then all that energy, all that dopamine and serotonin that they're feeling, and even potentially even adrenaline, if you're great, it's going to go away and nothing will change. And when people bring in speakers, they are looking for change. They're looking for a commitment. They're looking for change. That's where the actionable piece comes in. Like I tell big stories, I make points, but I'm always going to pare it down into something really simple and clear. As I mentioned, that's repeatable that people can act on going forward.
Yeah. Because it is something I think no one thinks about, where it's like, yeah, you think of that energy or you hear a great speech. Even, I'm thinking of like, I'm a literary person. So the big famous DFW, this is water speech that he gave at Kenyon College in like 2002 or whatever, it kind of, I don't know, like it inspires you when you hear it. And it's like a very heartfelt, good speech. Obviously, that's why it's so famous, especially in literary communities. But like, it does, do you actually do anything after hearing it? And I think about like expanding that to all college commencement speeches or something. A lot of times they're great speeches. They're great, inspirational. You feel good, leaving the auditorium or watching it on YouTube or whatever. But then do you actually take that into account? Do you actually start doing the practices that are preached in that? And most people, no, they don't, like, why would you? So that's the key difference. And I was just curious about that. I like the phrase though. I like coining phrases, and maybe that's the writer in me and stuff. I really, really like that. Another one I want to ask you about, speaking of phrases, neuroeconomics. What is that? Explain it for listeners and how you use it.
Yeah. So neuroeconomics is really understanding the real estate in your brain. And so once we understand the way that our audiences, our listeners, our prospects, our family, anybody that we're communicating with, once we understand the way that their brain processes information, we can be much more effective. Never, ever, ever to manipulate that knowledge, not to use it for manipulation, but to honor it. So I'll give you an example. I'm sure that you know, and people hear that we are as a culture becoming increasingly addicted to dopamine. Well, rather than being angry about it or fighting against it, we need to use our knowledge of neuroeconomics to honor it, to lean into it. So what does that mean? Because people are addicted to dopamine, that means we need to be very unpredictable, very novel, and very succinct with our communication. So it's just the ability of understanding the way the brain processes information and then using that knowledge to communicate more effectively.
That's interesting too, because neuroeconomics, like when you hear that phrase, I'm just like, oh, brain chemistry, but it is this kind of, maybe it's that kind of that psychological trait. Like we said, what stories are you telling yourself? What are you spending the energy thinking about? Like if people talk about anxiety disorders, again, that's the effect of this dopamine culture. Yeah. When you're hit with this dopamine all the time, when you don't have it, of course, you're struck with this kind of anxious feeling and stuff, depression, all of that. And like, it is kind of remarkable how much can be changed with a little nudge, with a different story, without any actual physical change in the world. You can just change that kind of neuro link to it. Or like, yeah, what are you spending your time working about? Are you scrolling constantly? Well, then you're constantly going to be thinking of that. And I think about that with creatives too, writing. Like, I think that affects you. What you consume affects you, and you see the language changing. You see the way people interact online. It's all learned behaviors. Like, it's learned behaviors. You weren't born acting this way. The kind of internet snark, rudeness, or straight meanness, people are just straight mean.
It's a whole other world out there. And a lot of it causes us to not lean into neuroeconomics. That's not my term, by the way. I mean, it's kind of a newer term, but it is because neuroeconomics is driving business strategy today, big time. And if what we want to tend to do is to talk people out of what they believe to be true. And that's not the most effective way to communicate. The most effective way to communicate is to seek to understand, to remain curious, to really try to understand someone's perspective, and then use that understanding to find a way to come together. And that's when we build something called serotonin. When someone feels validated, it feels good to them, then they are open to listening to us. That all is part of neuroeconomics.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. I do, and I'm moving on to the book here. I did want to ask, so why write a book? What drove you to pen a memoir about this, especially given, your successful career, your business and all that? I always joke, writing books is a terrible business model nowadays. What drove you to write a book, and like how that came to be?
And, I'm glad that you brought up the business of it, because if I would have written the book as part of my business strategy, I would have written a different book. I do have a Talk to the Brain ebook, and at some point I will update it and publish it with my business. But that's not this book. This book is a story of a family that lived on, and it's mostly a story of a mother that truly lived on the energy of love. And it's a journey of my running a business, trying to manage a family, learning so much based on what I was studying and what I was experiencing of how to show up better, more closely aligned with the person that I want to be, person of my values. And I'm still learning that, and I'm still growing, and I'm still wanting to do it. So again, I wrote the book truly because I think that the story will empower people to be more truthful, to be more free, to allow themselves to live in love and joy, even through the darkest of times. And particularly mothers do not allow themselves to do that. They think, I don't know if you've ever heard this term, but you're a father, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Parents will say, I'm only as happy as my saddest child. And what that means is, I'm going to not allow myself to ever celebrate this life until all my children are fully happy, successful, independent, no pain. I mean, it's an absolutely debilitating mindset. We owe it to our children to find sources of joy that are not connected to them, and to show them that no matter what we are facing in this life, we have something to celebrate.
Yeah, that's, I mean, with children too, especially, I mean, it's always like, I mean, my daughter's young, like she's not even a year old now, my first, but she's I don't know. I mean, I do feel this. I mean, how do I describe it? I mean, I always say, like, the psychologist Jordan Peterson, who I'm a fan of, he would always say, having children, he would say, is a third of being alive, is like 1/3 of what it means to be alive, like in the world, to be human, because it really does open these things that you never thought of before, that you'd never even really felt before. It unlocks something in the brain, like when we're talking about all this kind of psychological stuff. What drives sales? Well, what drives love? What drives this bond that you feel? And maybe we could get cynical about it, is, oh, it's oxytocin, or, oh, it's this chemicals stuff, and it is that, sure, but it's also like, I don't know. I mean, I like to romanticize things. I think we're a total lack of romanticizing in our culture right now, that we need to romanticize these things like love, like you said, energy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm a millennial, so I say the word vibes, but I'm like, I wish there were a better term, but there isn't. Like, it's this you can't touch it. It's intangible. You're just kind of floating around somebody, their aura, maybe. I don't know. The energy that you put out can be felt, and it can even be felt through a screen, in this kind of, like, when you're talking on Zoom or something, not as well as in person, or giving a speech or something, but it can be felt. It can be felt through the podcast episodes or something like that, people listening. It is there, and it's this strange thing, but
I sometimes will call it energy, but I often refer to it as my spirit. And I equate it to say it's at the intersection of our heart and our soul. And we can never give anyone the power to break that. That is ours to own, not our children's, not our boss, not our spouse, not our partner. It is ours to own. I really, just thinking about having a young child, I want to clarify something that I said and add to it.
Okay, yeah, please.
Because I would imagine that most parents at some point will do what I did to my children. And I've learned that it really wasn't the way to look at heartache. Your little girl is going to get her heart broken.
Right.
Somebody's going to say something to hurt her feelings. She's going to want something she doesn't have. There are going to be times when she's disappointed. And for so many years, I said, particularly to my youngest daughter, things could be so much worse. Buck up, buttercup, chin up, stop feeling sorry for yourself. And there's a time for that. But I believe that once we validate heartache and pain, that's where the joy comes from. If not, then we just have insincere, bullshit, toxic positivity, a bunch of fake friends walking around with fake smiles and fake everything. And that is not what I stand for. Our pain and our heartache, it's real. And once we acknowledge it, it is powerful. And it shows us how important our life minutes are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of that classic Calvin and Hobbes comic strip where, I don't know, he's complaining to his mother and his mother just says, well, Calvin, things could be a lot worse. Okay. You should be grateful. And then the last strip is him saying, he's like, yeah, things could be a lot better too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a good point, because I wanted to touch on this. So walk us through the kind of events, the kind of the diagnosis, what you went through when you found out that your daughter had this illness. Like how did that come about?
Whew. I think I mentioned, but it bears repeating, that she was 12 years old and I had a 14-year-old son at the time, and I had a 9-year-old daughter, and she just got a little virus and it turned to encephalitis, which is simply put inflammation of the brain, which she survived. But it left her with epilepsy, and the seizures that she was having, these particular type of seizures, they very, very slowly damaged the brain. This all started in 2005. She was in 7th grade. She graduated from high school in 2013 with a special education diploma. Today, her primary diagnosis, she's 33, is major neurocognitive disorder. All that to say that I have not yet stopped the seizures, but I'm still searching, I'm still fighting, and I will do this until the end of time. The book is not only about that, though. I write it in such a way that it's not about private moments, it's about personal thoughts. It's super vulnerable in such a way to be honest about what was going on in my mind throughout this journey and how I grew and what I learned from it. So early on in these years, when I was trying all the traditional medications and therapies, I was living on what I affectionately called caffeine, nicotine, and Listerine. Now today I call that pleasure stacking. But we do that today with social media and video games and sugar, alcohol, marijuana, all the things to take us away from facing what is going on in our life. We are just in constant distraction mode. I call it pleasure stacking. And there's something that's micro pleasure stacking. There's also something that I've coined a phrase for, I call macro pleasure stacking. That's like charging after the big goal, the next promotion, the big house. Well, I was charging after stopping seizures. And I share all this to say that early on in the story, I was living off that energy between the caffeine, the nicotine. Actually, what it was cardio. I was a cardio person, smoking cigarettes and living off caffeine. That is a death wish. And I was determined that if I would stop Caroline's seizures, I could put our family back together like a Hallmark movie. What a load of crap. And so I learned throughout this book to accept the heartache of what has happened to her brain, accept that my son was becoming an addict, and respond to that. So today, I accept the journey of Caroline's warrior, but it does not define me, and it does not ruin my capacity to love and to be truthful and to be free and to be joyful because I'm on this journey. There's little wins along the way. There's disappointment along the way, and it is a part of me.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to ask you about too with this is you did this kind of heartache versus heartbreak. It's a theme in the book, but I wanted to ask your thoughts on the kind of the difference between the two. I think this is an important distinction, kind of the heartache versus heartbreak distinction.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that because my editor did not like that phrase. But not every person, so many people that read the description said, I love this phrase. Tell me more. What do you mean heartache is not heartbreak? And I'll say this. If something is broken, then we have to repair it and try to put it back. And hopefully maybe it can be as strong as it was. But if we think about working out in the gym, our muscles ache. They're aching because they're getting stronger. And so our heart, while it aches, it's also becoming stronger. It's giving us wisdom. It's giving us more fight for joy. So the heartache is not finite. It is part of me. I will not ever heal from the heartache of what has happened to Caroline's life. She got the short damn straw. That is a fact. And if I try to talk myself out of it, oh, but she has this and she has that, it makes me feel like crap.
Right.
I've accepted that my heart will always ache for her. And that also is energy. That heartache is energy. It makes me want to take microphones and make sure that I'm giving love away and making the story matter. If I tell myself my heart is broken, that makes me feel like sit down and cry in your coffee. To me, it feels very finite, a break. But the heartache, that's where strength comes from.
Yeah. I like that comparison too, to working out and stuff with it, because it's training. Like, it's training the heart, just like you would train the mind or the body. You see monks or whatever that can have such control over the mind that they can induce sweating or whatever it is. They can induce the kind of physical reactions in the body through that control. You do the same thing with your heart. You do the same thing with your mind. You do the same thing with your body. Like, you can do those things. Obviously, you don't have to go to that extremes like these monks doing it, but like, I think that's just, I hadn't heard it before. And I think to make that distinction is so important to just living life, right? Because we let these little heartaches almost define us, where you're like, no, look at the heartaches as more positive, but like, but there's still those horrible tragedies, heartbreaks, deaths, tragedies, even, significant others, marriages, whatever it is, there's always going to be that broken. I don't know. I mean, I just think that's such a great distinction to make. I think it's important to remember, especially now where we're constantly bombarded with these kind of dopamines inducing things, like you said, pleasure stacking, to avoid the heartache. Or
we shame ourselves for it. We tell ourselves we shouldn't feel this way. And I've accepted that, who would I be if my heart didn't hurt for what all of my children have been through? But I'm still learning to accept my own heartache, my own disappointment in things in life that haven't gone my way. We all have it. My journey's nothing special. But what I've learned from it, I truly hope that it feels like gifts to others. And I hope the book entertains people and makes them laugh along the way, because I love laughter.
I want to ask you about that too. Yeah, because it's part of your love importance of laughter and stuff. But yeah, I think this kind of what we get from this, I don't know. I mean, the way that we take ourselves out of it. I mean, I always say, like, the human brain, like, there's this obsession with trauma in our current kind of culture, the psychological studies and stuff. But when you look at the brain and stuff, it's actually like a perfectly designed to get over trauma. Like, it's actually perfectly designed to help you move on from a horrible experience or even like massive disfigurement or, any type of tragedy, where you come out the other side not the same person that you were when you went in. It's almost set up perfectly to help you along that way. But it is not that it's easy to do, but I think something like you make that distinction will help people along that kind of, you can get over that, you can move on. Like, it is possible. You don't have to dwell in this area, accept it, but you don't have to make it your whole life. You don't have to define yourself by this thing, because you can move on from it. You can get to this point where you're content, and even beyond content, very happy. Like, you can get to the goal everybody wants. And I want to get to, please go on, please.
It feels, it feels very cognitively dissonant to say that we need to have gratitude for our trauma. I can't find any gratitude for what Caroline has been through, but I can for what my son's gone through, and my younger daughter, and what I've gone through. I can find a reason to be grateful for all of that. And that is a bit of a Zen Buddhist mindset, but that is what gives me great peace. Rather than saying, poor me, why this happened to me? Look at my friends, look what they have. Is once we find some gratitude in that trauma, we can use that for
Yeah.
so much good.
I agree. I mean, yeah, and I think you said Buddhist. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that, and then I think even in like the kind of the Christian style forgiveness, there's a lot of wisdom in that. Like when you can forgive yourself and like the people that wronged you, there is kind of a healing thing that comes over you in a
Yeah.
way. Like it's not out of thin air that it was created. It was centuries of people figuring this out. Uh, where was I don't want to ask you about hope because I think this goes to it too, and it's another theme in the book, and it's a theme on this podcast.
Really?
I am obsessed with this idea, just like the stories, what gives us hope, what gives us energy to keep moving on in spite of tragedy and stuff like that. Because I think it's important in fiction and art and culture, but I think it's important these other ways too. But I wanted to ask you, yeah, why is hope so important? And again, this isn't something where we need definitive answers. I just want, Tara's thoughts. Why is hope so important? And how did you find hope in a dark time like the book documents?
Well, I have a pretty clear answer for that, but before
Please, yeah.
I'll share that what I've learned is that a lot of folks are afraid of hope.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they're afraid to believe that things can change because they feel like they're setting themselves up for heartache, but not heartbreak, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and I had someone tell me a long time ago when I was first building my business. He said, Tara, don't get too high or too low. Don't get yourself too happy when you win, too sad when you lose. Just kind of, play it safe. And I tried that for about 2 weeks. That is not how I'm made.
Yeah. It's hard
I'm
to
just
do.
not
Yeah.
made that way. A lot of people can. They have a little bit more of a cynical mind. We are all created differently. I am not created that way. I am going to hope for miracles. I'm going to trust in innovation. I'm going to believe in my ability to keep looking for answers for Caroline. And I'm going to hope and that one day I find that answer. And if I get disappointed, if I hope for great love, for example, for someone that maybe is hoping for great love, please don't let yourself not trust in great love. I certainly found it. So hope, again, is energy, but it cannot, to me, we cannot keep hope if we sit back and fold our arms and wait for things to change. We have to take action. And that's how I live in this energy of hope, by continuing to take action. Not every single day, but I devote part of my week every week to not only looking for ways to stop Caroline's seizures, but giving her a better life, finding a new caregiver, a new activity, a new friend, something that she enjoys. It is a full-time flipping job if I let it be. So I'm always looking for ways to improve her life. And when I make some success, I found her a little job, it's a win. And I'm going to celebrate that win with all my might.
Yeah. I'm thinking of this now. I didn't plan on this, but I'm thinking of this connection with motherhood as well. Like kind of, and the reason I'm thinking of this is because I don't know. I mean, the reason I'm obsessed with hope on the podcast and just kind of constantly talking about it with people and thinking about it is that I feel that we are living through a kind of negative time where like their hope is few and far between. Everything is negative. All the articles that you can read in the newspaper, usually negative, whichever, and this is for any direction you want to go with politics or policy or whatever, it's always negative. Oh, we can't do that. That's been like the spirit for the last, I don't know, couple decades, where it's like, oh no, 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 we can't do that, it's too expensive. Oh no, no, we can't do that, it's too hard. Or oh no, 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 we can't develop that technology or something. I'm just like, what? Like, it's like, what are you talking? Of course we can. Like, of course we can do this if we wanted. So I don't know. I like to do that, but I was thinking of like where that came from for me, and I was like, I think that came from my mother, where my mother was very positive about, almost, it still is. She's in her 70s still, incredibly positive about things and instilling that in her children and her family. So I don't know, I was just curious to ask you about, I don't know, you think motherhood has any type of connection to that, like almost being like, I mean, I'm not talking about gender roles, I mean, well, we could, but I'm just like the mother kind of providing this kind of, again, like this kind of intangible energy around the family, like this hopeful, well, let's look on the bright side, or even just something small like that. I don't know, whereas like not that, my father was negative or anything. He never was, but it was just, I don't know. I mean, just your thoughts. I'm rambling now because I didn't prepare this question, but yeah.
Yeah. Like where do I think that hope comes from within?
Just like any kind of connection to motherhood with hope, kind of you being a mother and that changing your perspective or driving you to provide it more, or I don't know. I mean, again, I didn't prepare this, but I just thought about it when you mentioned your children and kind of the energy, hope energy, and
Yeah. Um, I tell you what I believe about mothers and parenting as it relates to hope. And it's not only hope, but our parents try to teach us by telling us things.
right.
We learn from our parents by watching them.
Mm-hmm.
We watch what they do. We listen to what they say to other people, how they treat people. We learn from all of that. And for me, I can only answer really for myself. Why I remain optimistic and hopeful. And I think part of it is because when I was young, my mother worked late at night with sewing and cleaning or whatever she was doing. She was just a night person, not a drinker or anything, but she slept in the mornings, and we got ourselves off to school when we were very young. And my dad was never there. All that to say, I learned at a very young age how to take care of myself. And I also learned that if I wanted to make something happen, I was going to have to get out there and make it happen. And that's the only way that I can have hope is through action.
Right.
So for me, I don't know if that has something to do with motherhood or not. I have been called a Pollyanna. I have been called a realist. And I say, bring it on, baby.
Right.
Rather shoot for the stars and, maybe land somewhere in the clouds as opposed to cross my arms and say the world's going to shit and there's nothing I can do about it. So I might as well have another beer. That's just not me.
Right. Yeah. That's not me either. And that's why I have this drive where I'm like, stop looking at it that way. Like, oh, we can reclaim land out of the ocean if we want to. Okay. We can do anything.
Yeah.
We have so much we could do. What are you talking about? Like, there's so much we could do. Like, you can spread this love. You could start a business. You could do anything you wanted in this country and this setup right now. Could it be better? Sure. But that's hope too, to improve. Like, that's hopeful. Like, yeah. And this brings, please.
I mean, it's a season that we're living in because people say, oh, there's so much evil right now. And what about slavery? I mean,
Right.
Talk about evil. I mean, there's always been evil. There's always been divisiveness. The divisiveness in our country, I think, is worse than it's ever been.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to have to burst at some point. I truly do.
Yeah. And I wonder if we're at the beginning I wonder if we're at the beginning of the kind of the pinprick to the balloon where it's gonna, little slowly leaking air and then all of a sudden a big kind of burst of air and it deflates. We'll see. But yeah, I agree with you. I'm just tired of seeing it. Like I said, I'm kind of a romantic person. I like to romanticize stories. I like to romanticize the American dream. I like to romanticize art and literature. I like to romanticize, the coffee you're drinking. Like, I want to be seduced by it. I want it to be good. I want it to, it's just, that's all a part of, I think, having a positive hope and energy. But this brings us to laughter too, where you had this great blog post about laughter and what it does to the brain. So I wanted to ask you, what is it about laughter that makes us happier, and why do you view that as so important in your work?
Well, I'll be very specific with the science first. It gives us something called endorphins. And we can get endorphins only in a few ways, naturally. You've heard of a runner's high?
Yeah.
That's a heck of a lot of work to get to that runner's high, but that's one of the ways. And what endorphins do is I should have prefaced with this. Endorphins don't really give us pleasure. What they do is they relieve us of pain. So it's not pleasure, but think about when you're relieved of pain, it feels amazing. Even if like your bladder's full and you go to the bathroom, you're relieved of pain, you feel great. That's what endorphins do. Well, we can get endorphins. Here's the main three ways. The runner's high, where you're pushing past your pain, you can get endorphins, feels great. Orgasm, can't do that all day, every day. And laughter. Laughter is a huge release in the body. And when those endorphins start flowing, because they have some hormone components to them, they can live longer in the body than dopamine or serotonin. So they're powerful. They truly, truly can lift our spirits. So that's why I think laughter is important. And it's always just been a part of me. Like I've always had a little bit of a mischievous, rebellious, looking at things funny. My best friend is an absolute riot. She's a character in the book. She always brings laughter, like even in the darkest of times. That's why I think a lot of the book, what the people are laughing at are things that I say or things that she says that just look at life and like, wow, even in the darkest of times, there is something really wickedly funny about this. And it really improves the way we experience life.
Yeah. And I think even something like, I'm thinking of that, that book and the documentary that came out, like was like 15 years ago now, like The Secret, where people are like, oh, like you can change your life by doing that. And some of the things they say is laughing, singing, just like bust out into song. And I find interesting with raising kind of, my daughter's in infancy still. So, but like singing to her, I sing to her a lot. And I've always, I've had a background in singing and stuff like that. I did chorus and stuff as a kid, and then through high school into college and stuff in theater. But it was so I'm trained, not like a professional singer, but I'm trained to sing or whatever. And I'm going to teach her how to do that. But I just, she calms down immediately, when you start singing, like, and it's not, it's not off key or something crazy. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. And I think that induces it too, and it makes it pleasurable for me. Even like if singing in the car or something, you get that kind of endorphin rush from singing. So it's always interesting, like, yeah, how these little quirks, but it obviously if you're in a bad mood and stuff like that, or something just happened to you, it almost seems like, oh, shut up, when somebody's telling you that you can sing or something, oh, go sing a song and you'll feel better. It's, oh, shut up, I don't want to hear that. But it also is true. Like there is some truth to it. Like you will feel better about it. I've heard even deep breathing and things like that, which, there's like techniques to it and stuff. But I mean, when you're really worked up doing something like that, purposeful action, breathing in this way calms the nerves that you can make a more rational decision or whatever, think through and not be so upset or just feel better, period, and it works. It does work. And it's a very small action, but it does work. And it's
well, that the breathing works because we're going from our sympathetic nervous system into our sympathetic nervous system. And that gives us a more calm state. So it's not just in our head.
Right.
That oxygen is really, really tempering that sympathetic nervous system, which is not where we want to function. That's when we don't make good decisions, when we become irrational. I mean, I have many moments where I've just had doctors and have just lost my flippin' ever-loving mind on folks. It's not common for me, but that is when the sympathetic nervous system is so much in overdrive that we're literally out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too. I didn't think about that, but yeah, being in rooms with doctors and you're getting something that you're like, I don't think so. Yeah, that would be a situation where laughter would be helpful or something like that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about grief, not just overcoming it, but how it's actually kind of a tool in our brains, and the way you describe it and stuff. Why is grief a necessary step in a lot of the processes of overcoming and things like that?
I love talking about grief.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah. And it took me a while to realize that I was grieving. And once I realized it, first of all, that made it very helpful. But I probably look at it differently than most. And I've touched on this, but I will say again that oftentimes people will equate grieving to, you need to grieve so that you can heal.
Right.
Or you're going to be in this grief state. And during that time, you're just going to have to be resilient. Well, I see healing is getting back to where we used to be. Like someone special to me died. I went to a depression. Now I'm back. That's healing. It's behind me. It's over. I see resilience as just weathering a storm, like putting up a big umbrella, a shield, and letting the sleet just beat the crap out of you. And you're just standing there taking it. And neither one of those work for me. So here's how I see grief. I see it as an opportunity to grow. I don't look to heal. I mentioned that I will always have heartache, particularly around what my daughter has lost. there's no really coming back from that. And there are people that have losses in their lives that are much more finite than that. Even though she's a different daughter, I didn't lose her. And that's heartache that lives in us. And it can beat us, or we can use it for good. And so I look at grief as an opportunity to accept the pain and use it to ask myself how I want to grow from it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's difficult to do too, like because yeah, I mean, the slogan is, yeah, oh, grieve so you can heal. That's almost like the cliche everyone tells you when there's some massive, loss in your life. And even if a small loss, like I think, yeah, I don't know, you lose the person that you were or something or whatever, and you're grieving that. I don't know. I mean, there's this one, I think it's something that people struggle to put into words. It's not that people don't feel it or don't want to talk about it. I think they have a hard time like putting it into words, which is where someone like you comes in, I think, to give them some words to put to it, where it's like, okay, this is capturing what they're feeling. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think looking at grief, like I think the way you describe it is looking at it in a positive way, looking at it as a way to, this is a part of life, and you can go a couple different directions after this. Like, which one are you choosing? Because I've seen in friends and family, I've seen, maybe you could say what I would say, grief consume people, where like you kind of get comfortable in that grief, and then it becomes kind of your personality, is that, oh, well, they're grieving constantly, like they're never really getting over it, or they're never really moving on from it, and that's almost harmful too, like to spend too much time in the grief. It almost, so I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, I wish there was like a great answer or something, but
well, I will remind us all that I'm not a psychologist.
You have to disclaim, yeah.
But I analyze and watch people. I've done it my whole life. And I think sometimes when folks are stuck in grief, it is because their loved ones are not acknowledging it. They're begging for someone to say, I would hurt too. It's okay. But everyone around them could be trying to pick them up. Oh, go for a walk, have a coffee, call a friend, get a hobby, all these things to try to pull them out of it. And they really just need someone to sit in it with them. Not for pity, because, pity is the worst feeling to me, but for empathy, for someone to say, I know this hurts. I can't imagine, but I will sit beside you. And I really suspect that's a big reason why people can't, they're waiting for someone to validate their pain.
Yeah. What I always struggle with when I'm experiencing depression or grief or something is I tend to wallow in it. I tend to almost, it's just a weird thing, but I think a lot of people do this, almost get derived pleasure from being in that state, like the, oh, poor me, kind of thing. And I'm fall victim to it. I find myself doing, where I have to physically kind of, maybe not physically, but mentally snap myself out of it, and kind of, and that could be, talking to my spouse or whatever, my parents or my siblings and stuff, my children. It's just, I don't know. I mean, I think that is something that it's almost like you can get trapped in it, or I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't know. I mean, I feel that kind of sense sometimes, that I tend to wallow in depression or grief when it comes over me, and be like, that, oh, poor me thing. Is that like, I don't know if that's just a natural human thing.
Let me ask you a question about that. Does it feel that it comes out of nowhere for any particular reason, or is it grief about something specific, like a specific event that's causing you grief?
Usually both. It could be something that usually would be caught on by something specific that triggers into a larger thing. Oh, this is my life or something, like kind of thing, which I think is natural, but I don't know why there's like a comfort in it almost. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like too, you're trying to put it behind you. And some people, maybe that's how they're made, but I can't see putting grief behind me. What I can do, and again, this is really a very much of a Zen Buddhist concept, is yes, and yes, I'm sad about this. I will forever be sad, that I lost my mom, but it's not every moment of every day. But there's a chemical side to this too. And if we are big in pleasure stacking, if we're having a lot of caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, video, any of those things, if those are any at an addictive level, then that's more of a chemical thing that we would have to address. Yeah. So that, again, all my opinion, all based on life experiences and studies, no degree here.
Yeah, yeah. And the reason I ask, maybe it's just my generation too, because I feel like there's a lot of people in my generation that where they feel that, where they tend to wallow in these negative feelings, or that, like, the poor me aspect, because that, I think there's something to that feels good to say that to yourself, oh, poor me. And that's easier than, like you said, taking the actionable step to move on from that or carry it with you in a lighter way. I don't know. I mean,
Do you think that saying to yourself, this is so honest, and I just love that you're this vulnerable. Do you think that saying to yourself, kind of, poor me, why are things going this way? Do you think it gives you permission to not work as hard, not do the workout, not do the things? Like, are you trying
absolutely. Yeah,
to give
absolutely.
yourself grace? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've found myself doing that before. Like, oh, today was hard on my heart, so I'm not going to do the thing.
I deserve this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So whatever that do the thing is, I would really encourage you to find healthier habits to go around this, because I will still sometimes at night, rather than maybe reading or walking or talk with my husband, I'd maybe just pour a big glass of red wine and eat popcorn and watch Netflix.
Right.
And that's my pleasure stacking today, and a little maybe M&Ms with popcorn. But I don't do it every night, because then it would be a bad habit that's taken away from the things that I value.
Yeah. And the reason I ask, and the reason I brought it up, again, I didn't plan to bring it up, but it was just like, I do find that, when you look at things like that, I do find that when you take action, it does help, so, like, if you can force yourself, if I force myself
Mhm.
to do the action, you do move on, like, that's how you kind of, but I mean, that isn't so easy. Like I always say to listeners, like, we talk about it, sure, but, like, yeah, it's not always so easy. Maybe you wallow in it for a few days and then you take the action. But if
Yeah.
you're never taking that action, you're never going to get over it. It's just, I don't know, it becomes part of your personality. And that's why I wonder if a lot of millennials in my generation and younger kind of wallow in it, because it becomes part of the personality, with this constant anxiety. Be like, well, I'm anxious because that's just who I am. I'm an anxious person. So actually, you're anxious because you're not doing this action, or you're not doing this thing that you're not addressing, or maybe you really are just terribly anxious and you need a medication or something. But it's just, I mean, there's comfort in, like, oh, this is who I am. So I don't know. I mean, this is, oh, I'm a depressed person, or, something like that. I mean, people would just
Anxiety.
excuse making, or I don't know. I mean,
I'm really glad you brought this up about your generation, because when I speak about your generation, a lot of people from my generation kind of shame y'all. And I say, we did it to you. You are a result of our innovations and what we modeled. And your parents modeled grind, 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 go hard, go hard, go hard. And so your generation is saying, you know what? I don't want to live the way these people live, these, what they did to us. So we put screens in your hands, and it's just so much easier today. You ought to watch my TED Talk. No kidding. It's so much easier today to get these little fixes that keep that dopamine coursing. So folks of your generation are way more anxious because of what you're putting in your bodies and what social feels like to you. It's so different than standing at a party with 40 people and feeling natural in that setting. Here's a little tip I will give you for overcoming these. Rather than saying, okay, I was going to run my 4 miles today, but I feel depressed and sad, so I'm not going to do the run. Or I need to work on this project, but I'm just going to put it off one more day. We all have that tendency. What I do when I feel like that is, I just do it slowly. So rather than deciding to run 4 miles, I'll just go out and just stroll. And if it picks up, great, at least I strolled. If I don't have the energy to work on the project, I'll set a timer and I'll just say, okay, 20 minutes. And when that 20 minutes is over, even if I didn't get anything done, at least I took a step in the right direction. And that gives me a sense of accomplishment. That gives me a little boost of serotonin, which feels really good to the brain.
Right. Yeah, it's something I'll do too. Is I kind of, yeah, like a bad workout is better than no workout. If you even if you're half-assing when you're in there
Yeah.
or whatever, after 30 minutes, you do feel a little bit better, and you have to be willing to admit that to yourself after, because I think again the tendency to wallow in it, you kind of can't admit that the action you took did make you feel, even if it's just slightly better. Like you
Yeah.
did make you feel a little better. So yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people do struggle with it. So I mean, again, your book and your entire business model and all around this is
And
needed, I think.
do you have a creative outlet?
Oh
This
yeah.
could be okay. Those are super important for the brain. Everyone has something about them that is creative, and a creative outlet is very integral to our mental health.
Yeah, and I've always been somebody that leans towards that for sure. So like yeah, when I was younger, it was usually music, bands, and things like that. Obviously, that didn't work out. And then I got very into writing and stuff in college and went to grad school for it and all that. So yeah, writing is usually that. And I guess you could say this podcast too, uh, for gives me some type of outlet for that. And I had noticed that too, when the days that I'm not doing something creative, or at least 20 minutes of writing, if you can squeeze it in, if I'm not doing that, the depression is worse, and I get more depressed. So like these actions that I know, as you age and you kind of learn about yourself, I know which ones will, kind of lead me down that path, and which ones won't, like which actions to take. So that's interesting too, how that evolves. I don't know. I mean, you kind of like know yourself as you age, and you kind of know yourself better. Well, hopefully you do, right? Some people don't, but you tend to just kind of know what works for you and stuff too. But yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Very interesting. The last couple of questions here, Tara, are all kind of writing questions about craft, process, and our listeners like to know this stuff specifically about
Okay.
how you craft these things. And so we like to ask writers, what is your writing routine like? How do you like to do this stuff? Especially somebody who comes to it here where, it's a lot of work to write a book. People always, again, they don't like to admit it because, again, it's sexier if it looks like you're not trying, but like it's a lot of work to do this, and daily, months, years long process. So what's your writing routine like? How do you like to do it?
Yeah. I used to pay attention to what other people say as to how my writing routine should be, and I'm not like other people. So the most important thing to know to me is to know yourself and how you work best. And the way that I work best is to have moments out in nature. I'll typically start with a podcast, and then when I get my cardio going, I'll turn to music. And music and maybe just some of the podcasts will allow me to just come up with ideas. And then I'll either record them into my voice memo in my phone, or I'll race back and start writing these ideas down. So that's one way that I get really creative. The other part about it is to know when I'm at my best. Some people are night people, some people are morning people. I have on my calendar every single day is blocked off from 7 to 11. No one can book a meeting with me during those hours. Now, if I want to let someone in, I do, of course, because, life. But no meetings are being booked during those hours, because those are my times for creative, quiet time. I like after exercise. I like to be after exercise with coffee, light meal, and get into the business of writing.
Yeah. I like that too, because it's always just interesting because we have some writers that have these elaborate rituals or something to get started, and then there's other ones that are just, I just start, and there's others that are, yeah, like piece it together through notes throughout a months long process, and you kind of gather these notes, and you can start piecing them together and all that.
Yeah.
And then going off of,
I was thinking about my book. I have a different process for writing speeches. And it is very much like I have a format that I teach and I use because I believe in it. It's a very kind of a broad format. So I start writing using the format. Then I will shrink that down into note cards, and I'll practice from the note cards. And then the note cards will have less and less on them. But I just love note cards. They feel good in my hand.
Right.
And I make sure that I have the phrases for the speech that I really want to nail. That's what's left on the note cards. And then when it's game time, sometimes I'll even bring the note cards with me, but I never end up looking at them, because you don't want to do that unless you need to.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting too, in terms of there's a different process for writing words that are meant to be spoken, like presented to an audience. Whereas,
Absolutely.
yeah, books presented to an audience, but it's a different format. So the writing process changes. Like that's very interesting. And our listeners like this kind of nuance. Yeah, they like hearing that kind of nuance too, because it different mediums require different things. We've had people on that do screenwriting and novels, and I always ask them about the difference, because there is a slight, even if it's slight differences, there's a different approach to the different mediums as you create in them or write in them. It's very interesting. And I wanted to ask you about the process of actually writing the book, because this is, I mean, not, there's heavy elements in the book, or as my generation would say, right? But what was the process like for writing about something like this? Did it take some time to be able to process it? Did it happen quickly? How did the project kind of snowball into a book like this, given all you've been through and, the years of looking into this and your journey?
Well, just to be clear, the book is a memoir, and but on the front of the cover it says a true story. And my editor didn't like that either, but as I mentioned, I'm a bit of a rebel. And so the first thing that I want to share is that a lot of people would say, how did you remember all these stories? And did you have a journal? Were they documented somewhere? And the answer is definitely no. When we start writing about our memories, it draws on other memories.
Right.
And so as I began to write the book, things would come. I go, yeah, I remember when this happened, this happened, this happened. I would just start writing them down, building them into stories with my expertise in storytelling. So I was happy with them. And then here's the important piece is the book, if you're writing memoir, it has to have a purpose and a theme. And if some of the stories aren't tied to that theme loosely, because there's subplots, obviously, and little lessons along the way, then you pull those stories out. Maybe use them in a blog or an essay, but you can't just put every single entertaining story into a memoir, because then you just have a collection of essays. And I kind of started out with way too many stories. And there are a few that I left that really didn't have any other point except for they were just funny as shit.
Yeah.
And I left those, just a few. Yeah.
What was that like, narrowing them down, like the editing process? Did you work with an editor to do that, or was it just kind of you had to figure out?
I worked with an editor by the name of Trish Lockard with Strike the Right Tone. And I chose her because she knows what she's doing and she's tough. And I didn't always agree with her, but I knew that she knew classic memoir.
Right.
She tried to say it's got to be the 3-act structure. And I'm like, that's just not how life happens. So mine's a little bit of like a 4.2-act structure.
Sometimes it happens anyway.
Reviews, so I did something right.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes that happens anyway. Like the structure kind of, even if you're not paying attention to it, it almost kind of naturally structures itself, especially given your background as story and stuff, beginning, middle, end, it just kind of starts to structure itself, even if you're not thinking about it. And then, of course, you got to polish it up with an editor or whatever. But yeah, I like that too, because I'm fascinated by the creative mind and how the creative mind works, and how you kind of pull all these little things from, memory from 40 years ago, a TV show you watched like 3 years ago, some scene, some image, some product pops in there, and you have to sort it out. That's the craft, that's the craft of writing.
I learned something else about memoir, and I think it's important to say that, a big piece of it is being vulnerable. And even I went to a Cheryl Strayed workshop. She wrote Wild, one of the most famous memoirs of all time. And she said the most important thing she could say is to be brave. And I think sometimes people take that to mean like tell your most private stuff. It's not about that. It's about telling your most intimate thoughts. And I think I may have mentioned this early on, but that's an important part of it, is to be super honest about how you were feeling and what you were thinking, because that's what people can relate to. We don't connect with people who have this amazing journey, went through this challenge and everything just worked out perfectly. And now I live in the perfect subdivision with the perfect, that's not what people relate to. They want to understand how you struggled internally, not just externally.
Yeah. And so that's another theme on the podcast here, is kind of the confessional aspect to pretty much like the latter half of 20th century literature into today. And I think social media kind of exacerbates it too, is kind of this tendency to confess something you did or something, about yourself, but like memoir is more than that, like you're saying, and that's where the art of it comes in, is like, what are you just confessing to relieve yourself? Are you confessing for clout, because that's something that happens on social media now? Are you confessing to get praise? A lot of people will confess something horrific on social media to get those little buttons to flash in front of their face and say, oh, I'm so sorry, like kind of you get the attention for it. But like the memoir is the one where it's like, yeah, this is a serious kind of, not editing it out, but just kind of the purpose behind it, where it's like, yeah, you can't just confess. It has to be kind of reflective angle to it, and lead into the next story or the next chapter about the life. And
Yes, there
yeah,
needs to be some aspect of transformation, or it is just, having the courage to tell something that's personal. That's not, I don't
right.
believe an honorable way to communicate, and it doesn't have a purpose. At one of my last readings, I told two stories that are not in the book that are pretty embarrassing, and the room just erupted in laughter with both stories. And they're like, I can't believe those aren't in the book. And I'm like, well, I mean, they don't really have a point. They're just funny.
Yeah, exactly. And they capture a little slice of life usually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing, we kind of already answered this question, but we ask all the writers that come on, how do you make a living? And again, we don't need any numbers or anything. Do you make any money off the literature? And we ask this question because we like to dissolve the illusion that all these writers are millionaires and stuff. That we've had, National Book Award winners on, and they say, yeah, I need a day job. Like they're not making a living off of this. And I know we kind of already answered this with your business and all that, but yeah, do you make any money off the literature or anything like that? And we don't need numbers or anything like that, but our listeners are curious about, it's rough out there for books and writers right now. You got to really fight. So,
Well, there are authors that make a lot of money.
yes.
Their names are J.K. Rowling, Jodi Picoult,
Stephen
I mean,
King. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so, dream big, baby. But and the other thing is, if you have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, that does not equate to hundreds of thousands of book sales.
Yes.
I've heard that over and over again.
Yes.
So the bottom line is, a lot of people write books as a mechanism to teach workshops, to get speaking gigs. Then yes, that's where the money can come in. And I certainly hope that people will want to bring me in to speak based on this book.
Right.
That is absolutely not why I wrote it.
Right.
And making any money off of it, not as much as I've spent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've had a couple that we're like, oh, we're breaking even, we're if that's a win if you're breaking even on it. Yeah.
No, I mean, I hope I will turn those numbers around in time, but it's the long game.
Yeah.
It's the long game. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you have another one in the works. Yeah. Another thing we ask all the writers that come on, what advice would you give to writers out there trying to start something on their own like this?
Don't quit your day job. And figure out what process works for you and stick to it. Many, many writers will say, write every day. I don't write every day. That doesn't work for me. It makes me feel trapped and confined and like I owe something to myself. And that doesn't work for me. It works for a lot of people. But figure out what does work for you, stick to it, and then learn to be a better writer. Keep learning. I'm still learning to be a better writer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It never ends, really. Yeah.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, the last two questions we ask here are just kind of about that what's in the head kind of stuff. So we like to ask, are you reading anything good, watching anything good, listening to anything good that's penetrating your mind right now and like filling your subconscious? And this can be anything. This can be anything that you've consumed. It could be garbage, trash TV, or it could be, serious drama or Shakespeare. What's anything that you'd recommend or anything you've seen, watched?
So
read,
I
recently?
just finished a book, and it has been a long time since I read a book that I could barely put down. And this book was that book. And it is called A Place Called Home by David Ambrose, Ambroz. A powerful story. I just can't say enough about it. It is a memoir. The man is very successful today, and he grew up homeless and then in foster care. And what he's doing with his journey is it is a heck of a story. He does an amazing job. So that's top of mind right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And we'll link that below as well. We like to we're always curious about, what's filling your head, what's taking it out. And then the last question we like to ask on top of that is, what are you working on now? You said there's another book project, or obviously your business constantly and all that, but.
Well, yes, I am still growing my business for sure. So I love to come in and do storytelling workshops and people don't understand sometimes, especially people from my generation, what is the power in that? The power in the storytelling workshops is twofold. It connects and unites your team and builds trust. And it also teaches you external communications. So nonprofits and marketing and sales teams love this work. So that's big right now. I am doing some keynotes about, one's called The Joy Factor, which is really a lot from this book. So keynotes, and then I have individual clients whom I coach to help to speak, to tell better stories, to write, love all that. And at the end of my book, and anybody can Google and find this out, my son is sentenced to prison. And this was on December 1st, 2014. And I cannot tell you how many people are like, are you going to write another book?
Right.
What now? So I didn't mean for it to be as suspenseful, because, you can find out just by going on my social media. But the journey of being a mother with your only son incarcerated for 7 years and 41 days is a whole nother story in itself. And so I'm going to write that story, and I'm already working on it. Yeah.
That'll be fantastic. That'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that was all I had, Tara. I mean, this has been fantastic. Please, where can people find your stuff, your website, your socials, all of that?
Yeah, the best way to connect, just because it's easy to remember, is at Tara Heaton Author, which is Instagram. And that's new. I built that just as a result of becoming an author. So that's an easy way to find me, at Tara Heaton Author on Instagram. But my website is onpointglobal.com, and it's French. So it's ENPOINTE global.com.
Fantastic. And that's all linked below as well, listeners. So go click on it and go click on Tara's book. Again, Tara, please come back. Please come back for the next book. Please come back anytime. We'd love to have you back on. This has been great.
It's been a really rich and juicy conversation. I usually hurry because I think we're pinned for time, but you said you like to go deep and long. So I like that about you.
Good. Yeah. Well, again, please come back anytime.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Andrew.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.